So I hope that in the coming week we will, and we'll cast a lot of votes, and it will more closely resemble the really productive markup that we had in the Judiciary Committee, thanks to our chairman, who has now joined us on the floor. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Vermont.
Mr. President, what is the parliamentary situation?
The time for debate goes until 9:30. The senator from Vermont has 13 minutes.
Thank you. I thank the distinguished presiding officer and my New England neighbor. I thank the senator from Utah for his kind words about the markup in the Senate Judiciary Committee. As he knows, we had something like 300 amendments before the committee, and I brought them up, had them all filed online a week and a half prior to our committee meeting. And I called them all up, one by one, Republicans and Democrats. We debated them and voted on them. But, Mr. President, the difference between what we were able to do in the committee, incidentally, we voted on something like 140 or so amendments. About 40 of them were Republican amendments that were accepted. We had, of the 140 amendments that were accepted, all but 2 or 3 were accepted with both Democratic and Republican votes. And then we passed the immigration bill by a bipartisan majority. The difference is people cooperated, we were able to bring them up. I've given the other side, the Republicans, a list of 20 or 30 amendments, both Republican and Democratic amendments, most of which could be accepted by voice vote if they just allow us to bring them up. There's actually 29 of them. They won't let us bring them up. Talking about regular order and voting, we have Begich, number 1285, Social Security Administration. Cardin Kirk, 1286. Social Service Agencies, a resource to help Holocaust survivors. The Copper, Hovind, Pryor, 1408, talking about unauthorized immigration transiting through Mexico. A Copper, Coburn, 1344, DHS Office of Statistics. 1255 is modified. A Coates, Senator Coates, 1288, changing alternatives to detention programs. Feinstein-Kirk, 1250, authorization for the use of the CIR Trust Fund. Hagan, 1386, reauthorizing the Bulletproof Vest Program. Something that began as a bipartisan bill. Ben Nighthorse Campbell, Republican from Colorado, and myself. Heinrich, 1342, extending the hours of operation at Port of Entry in Santa Teresa, New Mexico. Another requiring DHS to submit a report to Congress. And now the 10 airport biometric exit pilots impact wait times. Kirk Coons, 11239, allowing certain naturalization requirements to be waived for U.S. Air Force active duty members who receive military awards. Klobuchar Coates, adoption amendment. Landrieu, 1338, typed by E-Verify. Landrieu Murkowski, 1382. public-private partnerships expanding land ports of entry. Alandra Cochrane, 1383, requires reports EB-5 programs. Alandra 1341, requiring DHS to attempt to reduce detention daily bed rate. Leahy Hatch, I mentioned that one only because it's co-sponsored by the senior Democrat and the senior Republican. Leahy 1544, technical amendments. 1455 EB-5 clarification. Murray Crapo 1368, prohibiting the shackling of pregnant women absent extraordinary circumstances, all DHS detention facilities. God, if there's anything we assume they would pass unanimously.
Well,
Nelson, 1253, if I just finish the list. Providing additional resources for maritime security. Reed, 1223, increasing role of public libraries. Integration of new immigrants. Schatz Kirk, 1416. Port and visa processing. Shaheen Ayat, expanding the Invest visa program. Stabenow Collins, requiring a number of administrative changes. Udall 1241, expanding the Border Enforcement Security Task Force. Udall 1242, $5 million available for strengthening the border infectious disease surveillance. And, you know, we have a few others. These are all totally non-controversial, both Republican and Democratic. Normally, and I hate to sound like here's the way we did in the old days, but normally on a bill of this complexity, we take all the non-controversial Republican Democratic amendments, lump them together, voice vote them, and then start voting the controversial ones. I mentioned this is a list that we gave the other side, so they're all non-controversial. Can't we just accept them? Takes 10 minutes, 20 minutes, do a unanimous consent request and accept them all. They said no. No. They said we have to have controversial amendments. Well, why not do the uncontroversial ones and then set up a time, vote them, boom, 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 the controversial ones. Did the committee and worked. I see my colleague from Utah. I will yield to him without losing my right to the floor.
Mr. President, if I may ask my friend from Vermont, you know, we'd love to see us move forward. Why don't we both propose 3 of our respective sides' top amendments, come up with a unanimous consent agreement right now on 6 amendments that we could take up for a vote?
Well, I'd say to the distinguished senator from Utah, I made such suggestions to the Republican side. They're unable to accept it or unwilling. Not objected to by the distinguished senator from Utah, but by some on his side who have said they won't accept any agreement. And that's why we're here. It makes me think when a distinguished Republican came to the floor and asked the majority leader, what is holding up the judge from my state? And the leader said, every single Democrat's prepared to vote for your judge. And we said, well, let's have a unanimous consent. Let's bring up the judge that the Republican senator asked for, and we'll have a vote on it right now. Now, to his credit, that Republican senator was perfectly willing to, but was told by his leadership no. And weeks and months and a long time later, we finally voted on that judge. I think it was a unanimous vote. But we've cleared every one of the amendments I've talked about. Republican and Democratic on my side, has 28 or 29 amendments. If we're really serious, let's just pass them all. Then take whatever is left that's controversial, take them up one by one. I'm happy to vote all night long, all day tomorrow. And now we're equally divided on each vote. But the fact is, we have, with the distinguished majority leader's concurrence, we proposed 29 or more amendments that could be done in 2 minutes. And we're told by the other side they don't want to bring up any of these amendments. We have to understand, Mr. President, a majority of senators in both parties, we had 84 that voted for cloture, want to finish this bill. The fact is there are a small number on the other side who want no immigration bill at all. And they're willing to stall it forever. I talked about us all here, being here in December, singing Christmas carols. I hope we can avoid that for 2 reasons. One, it would be a terrible way to legislate. Secondly, now that we have TV coverage in the Senate, something that wasn't here when I came here, for the American people to be subjected to my singing voice, it would be cruel and unusual punishment. I believe it is something that is prohibited by the Constitution. And as chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, I would hate to be the one to violate the Constitution by inflicting such cruel and unusual punishment. So I would suggest, as an alternative, we listen to the distinguished majority leader, the senior senator from Nevada, get an agreement, go for it, vote on all these things, avoid having my friend from Utah and others having to hear me sing Christmas carols as we wrap this thing up, and do as we did in the Judiciary Committee. I think it was about this time, Senator from Utah, I remember well, maybe it was a little bit earlier than this, the last evening that we were voting, and we finished. I had provided so-so pizza in the back room. I think some liked it, some didn't, but encouraged everybody to finish, and we finished. We passed out a bill to the floor. But I see the distinguished majority leader on the floor, and I'll yield to him.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
the hour of 9:30 being momentarily here, I would ask unanimous consent that the prior agreement that was in effect the last hour be continued for another hour until 10:30. That means that I would be recognized at 10:30, that this would be for debate only. The time would be divided between the two sides, and that any quorums that would be called during the hour would be equally divided.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered. Clerk will call a roll.
Mr. Alexander.
About 10 minutes ago, Senator Reid, the majority leader in the Senate, came to the floor saying they're still negotiating on a deal announced today called the Border Surge Amendment by Senators Hoeven and Corker that would double Border Patrol agents and build 700 new miles of fencing along the U.S.-Mexico border. An article in Politico says 70 votes, not a pipe dream after immigration deal. A Senate Gang of 8 edged closer to supermajority support on its immigration bill and breaking through on an agreement and other measures meant to attract wavering Republican senators. Negotiators said as many as 15 GOP senators who were on the fence will now be inclined to vote for the landmark bill. Here's one of the authors of the compromise, Senator Hoeven, on the Senate floor earlier today.
To speak on the issue of
Senator
immigration
from North
reform.
Dakota.
Thank you. I rise today to discuss an amendment that I will be introducing Senate Bill 744, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform legislation that this Senate body is carefully considering and debating. That amendment is the Hoeven-Corker Border Security Amendment. It's being finalized, and I plan to introduce it this afternoon along with the senator from the great state of Tennessee, Senator Bob Corker, who's here with me, and I want to thank him for the tremendous work that he's done on this legislation. He's been absolutely inspirational to work with, a great leader, and somebody who is really working to do immigration reform the right way, to get a bipartisan solution that truly addresses the challenges that we face with immigration reform and to get it done the right way. In addition to Senator Corker and myself, other sponsors include Senator John McCain, Senator Lindsey Graham, Senator Marco Rubio, Senator Jeff Flake, Senator Kelly Ayotte, Senator Dean Heller, and others that are joining us on this legislation.
Would be filed at 6 o'clock. Now it's 9:40, and we still haven't seen it. Perhaps they're adding special clauses in to get special senators' votes before they file it. But I suspect it will be done tonight because the plan obviously is to file cloture on it and, immediately and try to move it to a vote as soon as possible. I just want to conclude my remarks tonight on one subject. The American people are good and decent people. They believe in immigration. They've always supported immigration in this country. But they have been demanding, pleading, praying for this government to develop a good and decent system of immigration that serves our national interest and makes them proud. And for 30, 40 years, we've had a situation in which people have been coming in massive numbers illegally. And it's not right. And the American people are not happy about it. And they are angry with their politicians. And I remember saying in 2007, the people weren't mad at immigrants. They were mad at those of us in Congress and in the White House and in the departments and agencies of government for not doing our jobs. That's what they're angry about. And I saw a poll not long ago that said 88% of the people said they were angry at Congress, and only 12% said they were angry at people who entered the country illegally. I think that's where the American people are. And so we've promised and promised and promised that we would pass legislation that would end the illegality and that we would make the American people proud of the system that we've got, and it hasn't happened. So this bill claims it's got 700 miles of fencing in it in this amendment, according to the newspapers, although we haven't seen the amendment that's about to be here. It wasn't in the original bill, but now after it ran into tough sledding, people started reading it, and it began to sink in popularity with the people and the members of the Senate. They came up with they say, a bill that has fencing in it. Not long ago, they were saying it was stupid to have a fence. Now we have an amendment that said 700 miles of fencing. Well, let me share a thought or two about that. 2007, 2008, we passed bills to build fences. 700 miles. I was one of the main sponsors of them. I think I was the sponsor of 700 miles of double-wide fencing. Eventually came out of the House, I believe. And we didn't have money in our appropriations bill to pay for it. We had voted for having a fence, but they didn't put up the money. And we complained about that and so they got embarrassed. And I remember saying, boy, isn't this clever? You go home and say you voted to authorize a fence, but when it came time up to put money up, you didn't vote for it. So we put up the money. Actually agreed to fund it. Oh, then they decided, well, we didn't really want to build a fence. We would have a virtual fence. And I believe Senator McCain said the other night we spent $800 and something million on a virtual fence that never worked. Every bit of it had to be abandoned. Some high-tech scheme. And the fence never got built. This was in 2008. Now, the first bill comes forward, they claim they had fencing in it. But when you read the bill, you know what it said? Secretary Napolitano was supposed to send forward a plan for fencing. A plan for fencing. But the truth is, Secretary Napolitano is on record publicly more than once saying she didn't think we needed any fencing. So what kind of plan was she going to submit under this bill? So we mocked that, made fun of it, but that was their goal. The goal was to pass an immigration bill that pretended to say we're going to build barriers and fencing at the border and not have it in there. That's what the plan was when they offered the bill. But after it hit tough sledding, now we've got 700 miles, but it's single fencing, not double, and that's not nearly as good because a person can penetrate a single fence and get by pretty quickly, but if they've got to do double fencing, they got a real problem, and you can run a government vehicle on a roadway between them, and it is very effective. That was done fundamentally in San Diego a number of years ago. San Diego area was at the border was just lawless. Drugs, crime, degradation of real estate values, and it was just awful. And they built a good, solid double fence, and all of a sudden, property values went up, crime dropped, and the area is doing so much better today. So the fences in these kind of areas are not damaging. Fences can make things better. And as they say sometimes, good fences make good neighbors. Good fences make good neighbors. So I just would say I'm not impressed with that so much. And I do think it's important for us to ask ourselves, will it actually get built this time if we pass that? I have my doubts because you don't have the trigger on it, as I understand from the reports. The trigger being you don't get the amnesty until you get the fence built, then you might get some fencing. Senator Thune offered a good amendment. Senator Thune's amendment said before you give the first bit of amnesty, you should build at least 350 miles of the double fencing. And then the other 300 has to be built therefore after that. That was voted down. But after the bill got in trouble, now they got 700 miles in there, or at least of single fencing. So that's the way this process has worked. And I believe the American people are absolutely right. They're absolutely right to be unhappy with their government because we've not served them well. They've asked us and pleaded with us to produce a legal system of immigration to end the illegality, and we have failed in time and time and time again to do that which they've asked us to do. And that's the truth. I've been here. I've seen the amendments. What happens time and again is amendments that don't make much difference, but sound good, don't really work. They pass. But you put up an amendment that would actually have a substantial impact, like actually building substantial fencing, and it goes down. It gets voted down. It's almost unbelievable that that's so. But I've seen it. My first experience of that was when I learned that people who come for visa overstays are not it's not the same kind of crime that crossing the border is. It's a civil penalty of some kind. And some people have contended, I don't think correctly, because I did a law review article on it. They've concluded, I don't think correctly, that the local police who apprehend somebody for drunk driving or speeding, and they find that they're here illegally as a result of a visa overstay, they can't hold them. They have to let them go, and they can't turn them over to the federal law enforcement officers. And so I offered an amendment to make it a misdemeanor to overstay your visa. Doesn't have to be long, but just need to clarify any confusion that this arises from that subject. I thought everybody was going to pass it till, they figured it out. Somebody that was watching the legislation said, wait a minute, if you pass that, it'll help them apprehend and deport people. You can't pass that. And all of a sudden, the opposition arose and it went down. That would have worked. Wouldn't have cost us any money, would have given greater power to do the right thing to the law enforcement community. Boom, it went down. So under President Bush, he reluctantly came along and got more favorable to a lawful system of immigration after his bill failed. And he agreed to establish a 287G program. Governor King may be familiar with that. It was a situation in which the local law enforcement officers, people that work in prisons, people at the state troopers headquarters and other officers could go to a federal training for up to 2 weeks, or maybe more than that. And they would then be trained to properly help the federal officers do their duty with regard to people who entered the country illegally. And President Bush signed off on it. The program was growing. It was very popular. Alabama was one of the states that sent people to be trained because we didn't want to violate anyone's rights. And, well, President Obama has basically killed it. They basically ended the program. And I would just say this to my colleagues. If we do, and at some point I think we will, provide legal status for millions of people that are in our country illegally in a compassionate way and try to do what we can to be generous to them even though they violated the law, and we do that, are we not going to have the ability to enforce the law for somebody in the future who comes illegally? Is that where we're heading? Because if you don't fix interior enforcement, you're not going to be able to ever do it. And we have a larger and larger number each year coming legally by visa and overstaying. 40% now of the immigrants illegally in our country are here by virtue of overstaying their visa after coming legally. So, what do you do about that? Well, you've got to have a system in which we welcome the assistance of state and local law officers. They are not entitled to prosecute people. They are not entitled to deport people. That can only be done by federal judges and federal officers. But they have always been able to take somebody who came in across the border illegally, detain them, and then turn them over to the federal officers for deportation. They don't want that to happen. This has been blocked systematically. The groups like La Raza have made this a high priority, and members of this Senate have responded every time they've asked for help and blocked every legislation that would in any way advance the ability of good state law officers to assist the federal government in enforcing the law. A state law officer can arrest a bank robber and turn them over so they can be prosecuted in federal court for bank robbery. They can arrest them on any misdemeanor and turn them over to the federal government. They can arrest them on illegal immigration charges and turn them over to the federal government. There's no doubt about that. But the government won't take them, won't come and get them. Ask your local officers. What happens if they arrest somebody they know is in the country improperly, illegally? They will tell you nothing happens. ICE officers are on demand. They have policies and rules that don't even let them come out and participate. Nobody is participating in the joint federal-state 287G training program anymore. This is over. And in fact, what we have is the Attorney General of the United States suing states who want to be helpful to the federal government and try to enforce federal law. So this is the area to which we've sunk. This is how far we've gotten away from having integrity in the legal process of immigration. And the American people aren't happy. And I hope they're watching this debate, because I've spent a lot of time, a lot of time looking at this. And this legislation, 1,000 pages. Who knows what this bill will be tonight? How many more pages will be added? And it will not accomplish what the American people have pleaded with Congress to do. It is focused overwhelmingly, totally has been focused on getting the amnesty first, even though they told us it would be enforcement first. They have to admit and have admitted it's amnesty first now. That's what it is. And then a promise of enforcement in the future. So that's where we are. I wish we could do better. I know we can do better. We can make the border lawful. We can make the entry-exit visa system lawful. We can make the workplace E-Verify system serve the national interest and make it much harder for illegal workers to get jobs. Now remember, under the bill, you'll legalize the people that are here illegally. We're talking about people coming in the future. Are we going to allow them to get jobs? Are we not going to allow ICE to do the job in the future? We're not going to empower them? And oddly, all the resources are going to the border, but none to deal effectively with the visa overstays. Now, the Congressional Budget Office, who analyzed the bill and gave us a report, 2 days ago now, the CBO report says with this legislation right here that we've heard is so marvelous will only reduce the number of people entering the country illegally by 25%. Can you believe that? Just 25%? That is just unthinkable, especially after we've been hearing the great promises of how effective it is. So I really wonder about that. And one of the concerns CBO expresses, the experts that they have and do the best they can, one of the concerns they express is one I've been talking about since this legislation has hit the floor. We're going to see a great increase in visa overstays. If for no other reason, there are going to be twice as many people coming to America on visas to work under this bill for temporary periods of time than they are today. And many of them are not going home when they're supposed to go home. That's what the numbers show. Many of them in these programs will come with their families, be able to stay several years, and then they're asked to go home. Fewer of them are going home. They may have children in junior high school. They're not going to go home when the law says, unfortunately. That's the experience we've been seeing. They could go home. They should have every moral obligation to go home, every legal obligation to go home. A very fine lawyer here wrote a piece I was pleased to read recently. I was the editor of the Yale Law Review, a Marine, and he just said, We tell our soldiers to go, and they go. We tell them to go to Iraq in harm's way a year, 15 months, 18 months, and they go. What do you mean somebody who comes to America for a year shouldn't be made to follow the commitment and the contract he signed? We make our soldiers do it. So we're in some sort of deal here that we can't expect anybody to follow the law. But my experience is, and the experience I see in the over the years with immigration is a large number of people are not complying with the law, and we can expect that to happen. So we're going to see a large increase in visa overstays, and it's going to be more than the border illegal entries at the border, and that's going to be a larger and larger part of the problem, and CBO basically found that in their recent report. I think that's truly accurate, and this legislation comes nowhere close to fixing it. The key to it is an entry-exit visa. Current law requires that there be an entry-exit biometric visa that covers airports, seaports, and land ports. This bill eliminates the biometric fingerprint requirement, eliminates that, and says it only has to be effective at air and seaports and not land ports. This bill is dramatically weaker than current law. And we passed 6 pieces of legislation calling for entry-exit visa systems over the last decade. Never been done. So why should we have enforcement first? That's the reason. We pass a law to build a fence, it doesn't get built. We pass a law repeatedly that says, let's have an entry-exit visa system, it doesn't get built. Doesn't occur. So we need to put the heat on the people who run this government, including us, to make sure that if we pass something, it's going to actually occur, and that's why there's been a broad consensus that needs to be a requirement that enforcement occur before legality occurs, and why the sponsors were originally saying their bill was enforcement first. There's every reason for the American people to doubt that this nation will follow through on those commitments. So, I'm concerned about where we are. I'm pleased with the way the House is proceeding. They're moving step by step, taking parts, individual parts of our immigration problem and fixing them. First one they're dealing with is interior enforcement. I've taken a good bit from their bill, and I've got an amendment pending. It will be hugely beneficial to the ability of our ICE officers to enforce law in the United States and help bring this whole system under control. It's a very large part of what we do. And I'm not sure we'll ever get a vote on it. I think I was in the 16 amendments here that was going to be approved for a vote. But what's happening? Well, everything was put on hold today, waiting for the favored amendment. It's supposed to be here at 6 o'clock. Now it's 10 o'clock. Still hadn't seen it. When are we going to get it? Well, how long will it be? What all will they have in it? We don't know. But it's not going to be a pristine document, I can tell you that. But my staff and I are going to tend to look at it. We're going to evaluate it. And we're going to see if it solves all the immigration problems. We're going to find out if it's just great and we can go home and go to bed at night and know that this problem has been fixed. And that's what we're being told, but I don't think it's going to show that. Why? Because this bill doesn't, and they said it did. They said it fixed all the problems, but it does not. They said they didn't believe in a fence. They said, senators said it was stupid to have a fence. And now all of a sudden, we got 700 miles of fence. They said Senator Cornyn, he was overreaching. He wanted 5,000 new border agents. Now the bill gets in trouble, they come in with 20,000 border agents and say it's paid for. There's plenty of money to pay for all of this. $30 billion, this article said, is going to go for that. Well, if it would actually needed and would work, I would help deal with that. But I have my doubts that this is the best way to spend our money. I think this was a political response to a failing piece of legislation, a dramatic, desperate attempt to pass a dramatic piece of amendment so they can say it does everything you want and more. So we'll see. Hopefully it does improve the border. But again, the border is just one part of the overall failure of our immigration system. So the right thing for America to do is to continue to welcome immigrants, to have a legal system that based on the national interest of America, very much like Canada, where they give points. And if you're younger, you get points. If you have more education, you get points. If you speak the language, you get points. If you have special skills, you get points. And you get points for that in, I think, a majority, maybe 60% of the Canadian immigration is based on a merit-based competitive system. So people apply, and the ones who are most qualified, ones who are going to be likely to be the most successful in Canada, they're the ones that get admitted, not the ones that aren't able to speak the language, who don't have skills that Canada needs, and who are going to struggle in Canada. Why shouldn't you choose the ones who have the best opportunity to be successful? This is so basic. And so we were told that this is a move to merit-based immigration. Well, we've done an analysis of that. I did a speech on it. And they said they were moving away from brothers and family connections. And they were going to have a merit-based system. Well, we've looked at it. It's about 10 to 15% of the total flow is based on this merit-based system. But then we looked at the details of it in this long 1,000 pages. And clever people had written it. So if you there are two children, two young people in Honduras, Argentina, who would like to come to America. One of them has a brother in America. One of them, and he's dropped out of high school. He doesn't speak English. He's not held a job before and has no real skills. The other one was valedictorian of his high school class. He has 2 years of college. He speaks English well. He's studied hard, and he's preparing himself to come to America. And he's got not 2 years, let's say he has 4 years. He's got a college degree. Under this merit-based point system, the brother gets 10 points. The young man with a college degree gets 5. It's just chain migration by another name. It takes a master's degree to get as much points as having a brother in the United States. And we were told we were going to move more away from that and more to an honest and competitive system. So even that small portion of the bill that focuses on merit-based, point-based system has huge advantages for people, for family connections, very large advantages for people who come from countries that not many people come to America. They get more points. And some other things of that nature that don't make much sense, frankly. So, Mr. President, I am hopeful that the legislation that we are going to have filed tonight, at least we've been promised it will be filed tonight, will enhance enforcement at our border. But I'm going to read it carefully to make sure it does. And then I'm going to be looking very carefully to see if it improves all the other flaws in this system. Because if it doesn't, I'm not impressed. If it doesn't make this system one that's likely to work, I'm not impressed. That's not enough to fix one part of the system. And finally, let me close by saying what the Congressional Budget Office, our own best advisors on economic matters, told us 2 days ago in their report. This is what they said. They said this legislation that's before us today will reduce the amount of illegal immigration by only 25%. Not what we were promised, only 25%. They said this legislation that's before us today will reduce the average wage of Americans in this country. Reduce wages at a time when wages have been declining regularly. They have said this bill, if passed before us today, and unlikely to be changed by the Corker-Hoven Amendment, that this bill will increase unemployment. It will make more people out of work, make more people go on unemployment compensation, go on food stamps, go on SSI, go maybe on disability if they can get it, because they can't find the job. And we'll have this very, very large flow of workers into our country. Beyond, I think, what the country can absorb at a time of high unemployment. So wages will go down. Unemployment will go up. Illegality in the system is only marginally reduced. And I don't think that's a bargain. I don't see how we can go to our constituents and say, that's what we're going to pass. I really don't think so. Let's don't do this, colleagues. Let's stop and push back here. Let's let the House proceed as they seem to be doing. Let's send our bill back to committee and consider some of these issues like, will it help people get jobs, or will it hurt people's ability to get jobs? Will it help their wages go up, or will their wages go down? And if it's pulling wages down, why are we doing it? That's what I think we are. And I believe it ought to be reviewed carefully. The American people need to know what's happening here. They're going to have to watch what's happening, because there's a politically correct movement in this body to move this bill out for all kinds of reasons unrelated to the substance of the legislation. And we're here to pass legislative substance, not some political vision, not some scheme to get votes. That's what we need to be doing. We're not doing that effectively, in my opinion. This legislation is defective. It should not be passed. And I'm confident tonight, if we get an amendment that deals with the border, still will leave huge parts of this legislation defective and unworthy of support. I thank the Chair would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Senator Lindsey Graham is quoted in an Associated Press story about a deal that's emerging on the immigration bill. The quote says, "This is a border surge. We have militarized our border, almost." The story goes on to say that lawmakers in both parties described a southern border that would be bristling with law enforcement manpower and technology. The emerging deal called for a doubling of the Border Patrol, 18 new unmanned surveillance drones, and as Senator Sessions just said a few minutes ago, hundreds of miles of new fencing. At 9:30 Eastern, Senate Majority Leader Reid said they needed another hour to negotiate on that border surge amendment. Here's more from one of the brokers of the compromise. We heard from Senator Hoeven and now Senator McCain of Arizona.
What this institution can be all about. Not only did they reach agreement between the two of them, not only did they reach agreement with, I believe, a significant number of our colleagues, but they also reached agreement with my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. That's, in this day and age, that's a signal success, and I thank them for not only what they've produced, but the many compromises that they had to make along the way. I won't try to embellish what the senator from South Carolina said, except to say that, Mr. President, I come from a state that has probably been torn apart more than any other state by this issue. We passed legislation in reaction to our broken borders, where ranchers in the southern part of my state were actually murdered, where our wildlife refuges were destroyed, where people died in the desert by the hundreds. Their bodies were found months later, where coyotes bring people across the border and then hold them in drop houses in Phoenix and hold them for ransom under the most unspeakable conditions, where drugs are brought freely across the border and guided by guides on mountaintops, guiding these drug cartels as they bring the drugs to Phoenix. And the drug people will tell you Phoenix, Arizona is still the major drug distribution center in the United States of America. So I take a back seat to no one, even from the great state of Texas, of the enormous challenges and controversies associated with illegal immigration. We tried before, and we failed. We tried before, and we failed. And I won't go into why we failed and all the people who are responsible. I'll take responsibility. I didn't do a good enough job in selling my colleagues on the absolute need for immigration reform. The fact are that 11 million people live in the shadows, and they live here in de facto amnesty, and by God, they are being exploited every single day. Shouldn't it be a nation found on Judeo-Christian principles to bring these people out of the shadows? Yes, punish them because they committed crimes by crossing our border illegally. But isn't it in our nation to come together and pass this legislation and not manufacture reasons for not doing that? Isn't there enough of a penalty? Isn't there enough border security now, thanks to my colleagues from North Dakota and from Tennessee? Isn't there enough now? So all I can say is I urge my colleagues to vote overwhelmingly in favor of this hard-fought, well-crafted amendment, and let's move on to other issues that face this nation. And I believe that we can look back years from now and say to our children and our grandchildren that we did the right thing. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
The senator from New York.
Mr. President, I understand that both my colleagues from New Hampshire and Florida wish to speak, so I would be happy to have each of them speak for 5 minutes and then me speak for 5 minutes, if that's okay.
Is there objection?
I ask unanimous consent, 5, 5, and 5, okay?
Hearing no objection, senator from New Hampshire.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank my colleague from New York for giving us that courtesy. I rise in support of the amendment that will be offered by my colleagues from Tennessee and North Dakota. I appreciate the hard work that they have done to enhance the border security provisions in the current pending immigration bill on the floor. To all of us, securing our border is very, very important to preventing another wave of illegal immigration in this country. But what they have done is incredibly important. It's very, very strong, strongest measures that I think this body has considered 20,000 Border Patrol agents, essentially doubling those agents that will be along the southern border. In addition to that, really significantly increasing the fencing. In fact, at least 700 miles of fencing will have to be completed along the southern border, almost doubling what was already in the bill for fencing, specifying what types of technology that the Department of Homeland Security will have to deploy, including the best technology using sensors and drones to make sure that we can apprehend those who are illegally trying to cross our border, and very much making sure that we prevent a further wave of illegal immigration, along with the strong reforms in this bill to our legal immigration system of making sure that we can keep the best and the brightest here to help us grow our economy, to make sure that we have the workforce we need to ensure that we will create jobs here. Let us not forget that we are a country of immigrants, that I dare say that most of my colleagues here that either their parents or their grandparents came from another country and worked very, very hard in this country. And so we need a legal immigration that works for our country, that makes sure that our economy continues to grow and that we have people here who want to work hard and live the American dream. But we also cannot ignore securing our southern border, and that's why I'm proud to co-sponsor the amendment that will be offered by Senator Corker, Senator Hoeven. This doubles the amount of border agents, doubles the amount of fencing, specifies the type of technology that is required, and gives the resources to finally secure our border. To my Republican colleagues, I think there was an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal today that's worth mentioning. I share their concerns about securing the border, but I hope with the strong enhancements that have been put in this amendment to double the amount of border security, to strengthen and double almost the amount of fencing, to make sure that the right technology is in place to secure our border, this will prevent another wave of illegal immigration, that they will not use border security as a ruse not to vote for a bill to fix an immigration system that is absolutely broken. The status quo isn't working for anyone, and none of us want to find ourselves here another 5 years from now debating this issue again and finding that we have a larger population of illegal immigration and we have a legal immigration that isn't working for our country and isn't making sure that we have the right people here, people who are working hard, living the American dream to grow our economy and create American jobs here. So, I think today the Wall Street Journal had said that this border security issue cannot be used as a trick not to want to support a strong bill which is on the floor with this amendment will make it very strong on the border security provisions and finally work in a bipartisan manner to fix a broken immigration system that is not working for anyone and not working for our country. So I thank you, Mr. President, and I will turn this over to my colleague from Florida, who I want to commend my colleague from Florida who has worked along with the other members of the group, the senators from Arizona as well as the senator from South Carolina, but the senator from Florida, I know how focused he is on making sure that our borders are secure. I appreciate his strong leadership in fixing this broken immigration system and making sure that we do not have another wave of illegal immigration in this country. And with that, I'll turn it over to the senator from Florida.
Mr. President. The senator from Florida.
Parliamentary inquiry.
Senator will state his inquiry.
My inquiry is that it's my understanding that we are getting equal time back and forth, and as my question is this based on parties so that Democrats and then Republicans will alternate in their time? Is that correct?
We have no agreement for alternating.
There's no agreement, so that those, because all I've heard in the last hour is those who are in support of the bill. My question would be, when can someone be heard who is not in support of the bill?
The time was equally divided between majority and minority, not between proponents and opponents.
I see. All right. There you go.
Is that inquiry, is that by unanimous consent?
It was.
Well, that explains it then.
The senator from Florida.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I appreciate this opportunity, and I'll be brief. My colleagues have already stated what this entails and the details of it, and I don't think that's important. I got involved in this issue earlier this year after spending the better part of my first 2 years in the Senate thinking about this issue because, quite frankly, not just being from Florida, but living in South Florida, I'm surrounded by the reality of it every single day. When I started this effort, I became deeply convinced that this is something that needed to be fixed and needed to be dealt with. But from the very beginning, from the very early days of my involvement, I made clear that border security was an essential component of it. And I want to clarify why. This is not against anybody. Border security is not an anti-anyone effort. That's not what it is. We understand that America is a special country. It's so special that people want to come here from all over the world, and they do. 1 million people a year come here legally every single year. We also understand that it's so special and unique that some people are willing to risk their lives to come here illegally. And as compassionate people, we understand that reality, and our heart breaks at the stories of what people have to go through to come here. But we also understand that the United States of America is a sovereign country. And every single sovereign country on the planet, every single one, tries to or does control its borders and who comes into the country and who leaves. Every country in the world does that. And the United States of America should not be any different. And so that's what this issue at the end of the day is about, is that we have a sovereign right to protect our border. And we have a crisis on the southern border of the United States. For many different reasons, people have chosen to cross that border illegally, consistently, for the last 20 or 30 years, and the results are evident to all of us. So that is why border security is such an important part of this bill and of this measure. Now, when we introduced our bill, the bill said that basically the Department of Homeland Security would be given some money and that they would get to decide what the border security plan looked like. Many people in the public and many of our colleagues were unhappy with that proposal. They raised valid concerns that we were turning over border security and deciding what the plan would be to people that claim it's already secure. And so what this amendment does is it takes that back, and it says that we here in the Senate, will decide what that plan is after we get input from border agents and others about what will work. And what this amendment reflects is what we know will work. We know that adding border agents, doubling the size of the U.S. Border Patrol, that will work. We know that completing the fence work, that will work. We know that an entry-exit tracking system, since 40% of our illegal immigrants are those who overstay visas, we know that will work. We know that E-Verify will work. It's something that many of my colleagues in my party have asked for the better part of 10 years will work, because it takes away the magnet of employment. And we know that these new technologies that weren't available to us in 1986 or in 2006 or even 5 years ago, we know that will work. And what this bill says is you must do all of those things, and it is linked to legal permanent residence. In essence, someone who has violated our immigration laws cannot become a legal permanent resident in the United States until all 5 of those things happen. That's the guarantee that this will happen. Now, let me close by saying I understand the frustration. I really do. I know that these promises have been made in the past. In a moment, the senator from Alabama, whose position on this is well stated, will point out that these promises were also made in 1986. By the way, in 1986, I was 15 years old, and I got to tell you, immigration was the last thing on my mind at that time. But here's the reality of it. The choice before us is to try to fix this or to leave it the way it is. And what we have today is a disaster of epic proportions. 10 or 11 million human beings living among us. We don't know who they are. They're working but not paying taxes. There are criminals among them. That has to be solved. A legal immigration system built on the 19th century? We need to fix this. And this is our chance to fix it. Thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from New York.
Mr. President, thank you. And first, I want to thank my colleagues, first, Tennessee, for the good work they have done, my gang of 8 colleagues, the 7 of the gang of 8 colleagues who are my colleagues. We are working real hard to get a bill done, and it is not easy. It's one of the hardest things I've ever done as a legislator, but we'll keep making progress and we'll keep improving, and today I think is a breakthrough day. Let me go over it. First, Speaking on behalf of the Democratic members of my bipartisan group, let's say this. There's still some drafting of the legislative language to be completed. We're continuing to inform all our allies on our side about the contours of the proposal. But barring something unexpected, we're extremely enthusiastic that a bipartisan agreement is at hand. I know there have been a number of news reports this morning. It is accurate. We are on the verge of a huge breakthrough on border security. With this agreement, we believe we have the makings of a strong, bipartisan final vote in favor of this immigration reform bill. From the beginning of the floor debate on this bill, we have known that there were a group of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle who were inclined to vote for immigration reform, but first wanted to see a strengthening of the bill's border security section. That made sense, because most Americans will be fair and common sense towards the 11 million here in the shadows and future immigration if and only if they feel we won't have future flows of illegal immigration. We took those concerns seriously. Our bill is tough on this stuff. We wanted it tough. The amendment makes it tougher still. Last week, Senators Corker and Hoeven emerged as leaders of the group of like-minded colleagues from the other side of the aisle seeking a tougher approach. My friends, Senator Graham and McCain, and I sat down with them. We began talking, along with Senator Menendez. We began meeting with them ourselves this week. For us on the Democratic side, it's been an important bottom line throughout this process that the path to citizenship not be put in jeopardy. The path is tough, as it should be, but must always be fair. And so we could not go along with efforts like in my colleague from Texas's bill that would tie the path to citizenship to unachievable benchmarks for the border. Senator Cornyn's amendment, which was defeated today, went too far in that regard. And I wasn't sure whether the new negotiations would produce agreement either.